Across back roads and forgotten towns, the past lives on. Not in textbooks, but in weathered plaques, quiet museums, and the stories we nearly lost. I'm Pelham Pugh, and this is American Shadows, uncovering the people, places, and relics that shaped our American history. Every nation has its myths. For the United States, one of the strongest begins here, on the edge of a Kentucky spring, and in one room, a log cabin. It is said that Abraham Lincoln was born here in 1809. A farm boy who had become the man to hold the Union together, free the enslaved, and give his life for his country. But like all myths, this story is complicated. What we see here today is not just history, it's memory. It's polished, enshrined, and preserved in stone. This is the birthplace of Abraham Lincoln, or at least the birthplace we chose to remember. Thomas and Nancy Lincoln brought their young family to Sinking Spring Farm in 1808. They were not wealthy planters or powerful in politics. They were farmers, poor, hardworking, constantly chasing land and stability. On February 12, 1809, Nancy gave birth to their second child, Abraham. Life here was rough. The cabin's walls leaked smoke from the fire. Winters cut cold through the cracks. Summer was filled with mosquitoes and heat. Malaria, consumption, and fevers could end a life in days. The Lincolns were part of their restless frontier world, where farms were lost to bad deeds, shifting titles, and failing crops. They stayed at Sinking Spring only 2 years before moving again. The truth is, Lincoln's early childhood in Kentucky was fleeting, but the memory of this cabin and what it represented would outlive him. The story of Lincoln's log cabin was more than biography. It was destiny shaped in the legend. In America, the log cabin became a symbol of humble beginnings, of the self-made man. Andrew Jackson, William Henry Harrison, even U.S. Grant, all carried the log cabin image into politics. It told voters, this man is one of you. For Lincoln, the cabin became his introduction to the people. Born poor, raised in hardship, he rose through honesty, hard work, and determination. That was the story. That was the legend. By the late 19th century, as America looked back on the Civil War, Lincoln was no longer just a president. He was a martyr, a saint, the figure who had saved the Union. And his humble birthplace became part of the national faith. The boy in the cabin, the man in the White House, a story that Americans wanted and needed to believe. By the early 1900s, a movement began to honor Lincoln at his birthplace. The Lincoln Farm Association, funded in part by school children who sent in pennies, launched the project. When the cornerstone was laid in 1909, on the centennial of Lincoln's birth, President Theodore Roosevelt himself spoke at the site. The memorial that rose from this red Kentucky soil was not a cabin, but a temple. 56 steps climbed to its entrance, one for each year of Lincoln's life. Its walls and columns recall ancient Rome and Greece, symbols of democracy and permanence. Inside, at the center, sits a single cabin. But here lies the shadow of the story. The one inside these walls was assembled later, pieced together from different logs, a replica of memory. What America enshrined here was not history, but the idea of history. A cabin of wood wrapped in a shrine of stone. Does it matter if the cabin is real? For most Americans, no. The cabin stands as symbol, a reminder that greatness can rise from poverty, that the Republic belongs not just to the elite, but to anyone. But for the historian, for the seeker of truth, the cabin raises questions. How much of history is fact, and how much is a story? And how much is the story we tell ourselves? Lincoln's birthplace, like so many monuments, tells us as much about the people who built it as it does about the man himself. In the early 20th century, America was healing from Civil War wounds, facing waves of immigration, struggling to define itself in a modern age. Lincoln became the answer, the humble boy who became a giant, the myth that could bind a fractured people together. In this way, the cabin is true, not as artifact, but as story. Abraham Lincoln is remembered as many things: the great emancipator, the preserver of the Union, the martyr struck down at Ford's Theater. But before he was any of these, he was simply a boy in Kentucky, living in poverty, moving from fawn to fawn. That truth, however brief his time here, rounds the myth in something real. His story did not begin in marble halls or wealthy estates. It began in struggle. And perhaps that is why the log cabin endures, not because it is exact, but because it is eternal. From a Kentucky cabin to the White House, Lincoln's journey reminds us of the promise at the heart of America, that greatness can rise from the humblest beginnings. But it also reminds us of something else, that nations need stories. We enshrine them, we preserve them, even when the details fade. Sometimes the shadows of history are not lies. They are legends we choose to believe. This has been American Shadows, Southern Noir with a soul. To explore more stories where history and memory collide, I invite you to read my novels, Perfidious Tides and Last Skies from the Sky. And watch for Live the Last Day, coming soon. In the Deep South, some castles are built from dreams, others from the wreckage of truth. They say death row breaks a man, but Vernon Bruce was already broken. His nephew would fight for his freedom. His son didn't care if he lived or died. And while the boys turned against each other, the real monster watched. Some wounds, they can't be healed, only avenged.